German Shepherd saves pregnant cat from venomous snake, but seconds later, something unexpected happens. The night was particularly quiet in the small suburban neighborhood of Oak Ridge, Massachusetts, when Duke, a majestic German Shepherd, raised his ears, alert to an almost imperceptible sound coming from the backyard. Something felt wrong. The air held an unusual stillness that made his protective instincts flare to life. Jack Anderson, a respected veterinarian in his late 40s, had fallen asleep on the couch after a long day at his clinic. His wife, Melissa, was away for the weekend at a medical conference in Boston, leaving just Jack and Duke to watch over their comfortable colonial home with its spacious, tree-lined yard that bordered a small wooded area. Duke paced restlessly by the sliding glass door, his nose pressed against the cool surface as he sniffed the night air. The scent was strange, yet somehow familiar, a mixture of fear and something else he couldn't quite identify. His keen senses detected a presence that didn't belong, something that set his nerves on edge. After several minutes of quiet whining that failed to wake his owner, Duke made his way to the dog door installed in the kitchen. With one last glance at Jack's sleeping form, the German Shepherd slipped outside into the cool April night. The moon cast silvery shadows across the well-maintained lawn as Duke moved with surprising stealth for a dog his size. His powerful muscles tensed beneath his black and tan coat as he systematically patrolled the perimeter of the yard, following his training and instincts. That's when he saw her, a small silhouette huddled near the stone wall that separated the Andersons' property from the woods beyond. Duke approached cautiously, his acute night vision revealing a calico cat, her swollen belly unmistakable evidence of her pregnant condition. She was trembling, her breathing rapid and shallow, eyes wide with unmistakable fear. Under normal circumstances, Duke might have chased an intruding cat away from his territory. Jack had trained him well, but he was still a dog with natural instincts. Yet something about this cat's vulnerable state stirred a different response in Duke. The cat seemed to recognize his approach, but instead of fleeing, she remained frozen, as if too exhausted or frightened to move. Duke stopped a few feet away, his head tilted to one side as he observed the feline visitor. The cat's eyes, a striking amber color in the moonlight, held a plea that transcended species. She was seeking shelter, protection, things Duke instinctively understood. As he took another tentative step toward the frightened cat, a subtle movement in the grass caught his attention. Duke's body went rigid, his senses heightened to their peak as he identified a new presence, one far more dangerous than a stray cat. A snake, its patterned body almost invisible against the dark grass, was sliding silently toward the cat. Duke recognized the distinctive markings of the venomous copperhead, common in this part of Massachusetts. The serpent's movements were deliberate, calculated, as it positioned itself for a strike against the oblivious feline. Something primitive and protective surged through Duke's body. Without hesitation, he placed himself between the snake and the pregnant cat, his powerful frame forming a living barrier against the threat. He growled deeply, the vibration rumbling through his chest, in a clear warning that echoed in the night air. The snake paused, its forked tongue flicking out to taste the changed situation. The easy prey of a weakened cat had suddenly been replaced by a formidable opponent. For a tense moment, time seemed suspended as three lives intersected in the quiet backyard: the protective dog, the vulnerable cat, and the deadly predator. The snake, undeterred by Duke's presence, coiled tighter, a telltale sign of an imminent strike. Duke's muscles tensed in anticipation, his years of training to protect the Anderson home and family extending now to this unexpected visitor. When the snake struck, it moved with lightning speed. Duke managed to shift his body to protect his vital areas, but the snake's fangs found their mark on his right shoulder. Pain, immediate and intense, shot through Duke's body as the venom was injected into his flesh. With a yelp that pierced the quiet night, Duke snapped at the retreating snake, forcing it to slither hastily away into the darkness. The cat, sensing the danger had passed, darted to the safety of a nearby oak tree, climbing halfway up before looking back at her unlikely savior. The sound of Duke's distress cut through Jack's exhausted sleep. He awoke with a jolt, immediately aware that something was wrong. Years of responding to animal emergencies had conditioned him to wake fully alert. "Duke!" Jack called out, noticing the empty dog bed in the corner. When no familiar thumping of tail against floor answered him, Jack felt a spike of concern. "Duke, where are you, boy?" Outside, Duke was struggling to maintain his balance. The venom worked quickly, spreading burning pain from the puncture site. His vision began to blur at the edges, but his training kept him focused on returning to Jack, on getting help. Each step was more difficult than the last as he made his way toward the house. The back door flew open as Jack emerged, still in his rumpled clothes. "Duke, what's going on?" The beam of his hastily grabbed flashlight cut through the darkness, finally landing on his beloved companion, staggering across the lawn. Even from a distance, Jack's veterinary expertise allowed him to immediately recognize the symptoms: the unsteady gait, the swelling already visible at the shoulder, the excessive drooling. "Snake bite," he muttered, rushing to Duke's side. Duke tried to bark in response, but managed only a weak whine as Jack knelt beside him, quickly examining the wound with practiced hands. "Easy, boy, I've got you." Jack's voice was steady despite the fear gripping his chest. This was Duke, not just another patient. This was his friend, his companion for the past 6 years. What Jack didn't notice as he guided Duke toward the house was the calico cat, who had descended partway down the tree and was watching intently from a low branch. Her amber eyes followed them as they disappeared inside, a strange mixture of fear and something else, perhaps gratitude, visible in her gaze. Inside, Jack worked with practiced efficiency, examining the bite more thoroughly under the bright kitchen lights. Every veterinarian in Snake Country kept anti-venom on hand, especially those like Jack, who lived in rural areas where emergency care might be miles away. He quickly retrieved his emergency kit from the hall closet, grateful for his professional foresight. "We need to get you to the clinic," Jack said firmly, administering what preliminary treatment he could at home. Duke's size and the amount of venom he'd received meant they couldn't take any chances with home care alone. With effort, Jack helped his weakening companion to the car, arranging blankets on the back seat to keep him comfortable. The cool night air seemed to temporarily revive Duke, who managed to climb into the vehicle with minimal assistance, though his movements were clearly pained. As Jack closed the rear door and moved to the driver's side, he caught a flash of movement from the corner of his eye. Turning, he saw the calico cat sitting on the hood of his car, her amber eyes reflecting the porch light. "What the—" Jack began, surprised not only by the cat's presence, but by her apparent determination. As if understanding his confusion, the cat jumped down and positioned herself by the passenger door, meowing insistently. Jack hesitated, torn between urgency and curiosity. Duke needed immediate attention, but something about the cat's behavior seemed deliberately communicative. His years of working with animals had taught him to respect their intelligence, especially when they acted with such clear purpose. "I don't have time for this," he muttered, opening the driver's door. But before he could slide in, the cat darted past him and leaped into the vehicle, immediately moving to the back seat where she settled beside Duke, her body pressed against his uninjured side. The unexpected alliance between natural adversaries momentarily stunned Jack, but Duke's labored breathing brought him back to the emergency at hand. There would be time to figure out this strange dynamic later. Right now, his focus had to be on saving Duke from the potentially deadly venom coursing through his system. As Jack started the engine and backed out of the driveway, he glanced in the rearview mirror at his unusual passengers. Duke's eyes were beginning to glaze over, the venom working its way through his powerful body, gradually weakening him. Beside him, the pregnant cat remained pressed close, her presence seemingly a comfort to the suffering dog. "Hang in there, buddy," Jack murmured, pressing harder on the accelerator as he headed toward Oak Ridge Animal Hospital. "We're going to get through this, all of us." The road ahead stretched dark and empty, the clock on the dashboard reading just past midnight. In the back seat, an unlikely bond was forming between two animals that nature had designed as adversaries. A bond that would soon be tested in ways none of them could anticipate. The headlights of Jack's SUV cut through the darkness as he sped down the quiet streets of Oak Ridge. Every few seconds, his eyes darted to the rearview mirror, checking on Duke, whose breathing had become increasingly labored. The German Shepherd's once alert eyes were now half closed, his powerful body weakened by the venom spreading through his system. "Stay with me, Duke," Jack urged, his knuckles white against the steering wheel as he navigated the empty roads. As a veterinarian with 15 years of experience, Jack had treated countless snake bites, but tonight was different. This wasn't just another patient, this was Duke, his faithful companion who had been by his side through the hardest years of his life. The calico cat remained pressed against Duke's side, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed almost comforting. Jack couldn't understand the unexpected bond between these natural adversaries, but he was grateful for it. Somehow, the cat's presence seemed to keep Duke calm, giving him something to focus on besides the pain. "We're almost there," Jack called, back pressing harder on the accelerator as he approached the animal hospital. The building stood dark, except for the security lights. It was well past midnight, and the clinic wouldn't normally open until morning. As the owner, however, Jack had keys and all the necessary access codes. He pulled into the parking lot and stopped at the emergency entrance, grateful that he had insisted on installing a separate door for after-hours cases. With practiced efficiency, he jumped out and opened the rear door, assessing Duke's condition with a professional eye. The swelling around the bite wound had increased alarmingly, and Duke's breathing was becoming more shallow. "Come on, buddy," Jack encouraged, helping Duke out of the vehicle. The German Shepherd attempted to stand but stumbled, his legs no longer able to support his weight. Without hesitation, Jack lifted his 90-pound companion, straining under the load but driven by urgency. What surprised him was the cat's behavior. Instead of fleeing when the door opened, she jumped out and followed them, staying close as Jack carried Duke to the entrance. She waited patiently as he fumbled with the keys, then slipped inside as soon as the door opened. Once inside, Jack moved quickly, settling Duke on the examination table in the main treatment room. He flipped on the lights and reached for the emergency supplies, his mind racing through the treatment protocol for venomous snake bites. The wound needed cleaning, anti-venom had to be administered, and supportive care would be essential to help Duke through the next critical hours. As Jack worked, the cat jumped onto a nearby counter, her amber eyes tracking his every movement. Her behavior was so unusual, most feral cats would be frantically looking for an escape route in such an unfamiliar environment, especially with a dog present. Yet she seemed determined to stay, as if somehow understanding the gravity of the situation. "You're a strange one," Jack murmured to the cat as he prepared the anti-venom injection. "But I appreciate the moral support." Just as Jack was about to administer the potentially life-saving medication, the cat suddenly began to meow loudly, her body language changing dramatically. She jumped down from the counter, landing somewhat awkwardly due to her pregnant state, and began to pace the floor, her sides visibly contracting. "You've got to be kidding me," Jack whispered, the realization hitting him hard. "Not now. Please, not now." The cat was going into labor. For a moment, Jack stood frozen between his two patients, both in critical condition, but requiring completely different types of care. His years of veterinary training kicked in, helping him prioritize. Duke needed the anti-venom immediately. That couldn't wait. The cat's labor while beginning would likely progress over several hours. "First things first," he said aloud, turning back to Duke and carefully injecting the anti-venom. He connected an IV line to deliver fluids and monitored the German Shepherd's vital signs, his concern deepening at the weak pulse and rapid respiration. "Hang in there, boy. This should start working soon." Once Duke was stabilized as much as possible, Jack turned his attention to the cat. He quickly prepared a nesting box with clean towels in a quiet corner of the treatment room, creating a safe space for delivery while keeping her within sight of Duke. The cat seemed to understand his intentions, settling into the makeshift nest. While continuing to watch Duke intently, Jack's mind raced as he moved between his two patients. He needed help. This was too much for one person to handle efficiently, with Duke's condition still critical and the cat beginning what could be a complicated birth. Jack knew he had to call for backup. He reached for his phone and dialed the number of his most trusted colleague, Dr. Laura Chen. Laura lived just 10 minutes from the clinic and had always been willing to respond to emergency calls no matter the hour. "Laura, it's Jack," he said when she answered, her voice thick with sleep. "I need your help at the clinic. It's an emergency, snakebite case and a pregnant cat in labor, both critical." There was a brief pause before Laura responded, her voice now alert. "I'll be there in 10. Have you administered anti-venom?" "Yes, just now. Patient is my own dog, Duke. Copperhead bite to the right shoulder, significant envenomation. The cat is, well, it's complicated. She's a stray who somehow ended up involved in all this." "I'm on my way," Laura assured him. "Start the cat on oxygen if you can. I'll bring my obstetric kit." As Jack ended the call, he looked between his two patients, overwhelmed by the strange circumstances that had brought them together. Duke's eyes were closed now, his body fighting against the venom as the anti-venom began its work. The cat had settled into rhythmic contractions, her amber eyes occasionally seeking out Duke as if checking on his condition. Jack moved to the cat's side, gently examining her to assess the progress of labor. "You picked quite a time for this," he told her softly, "but don't worry, we're going to get all of you through this." The cat blinked slowly at him, a sign of trust from felines, before another contraction gripped her body. Jack stroked her head soothingly, his mind still trying to process the unusual situation. Why had the cat jumped into his car? Why was she so concerned about Duke? It defied everything he understood about natural animal behaviors. The clinic's front door opened and Laura rushed in, bringing a welcome sense of reinforcement. She was still in pajamas under her hastily thrown-on coat, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, but her eyes were alert and professional. "Snakebite." "There, cat in labor here," Jack explained quickly, gesturing to his two patients. "Duke's had 10 ml of antivenom, full dose appropriate for his weight. Cat appears to be a stray, no collar, approximately 1 year old. First pregnancy from the look of it." Laura nodded, immediately assessing the situation with the practiced eye of an experienced veterinarian. "I'll take the cat. You focus on Duke. His condition is more immediately life-threatening." Then as they worked in tandem, Jack briefly explained the strange circumstances, how Duke had apparently protected the cat from a snake, getting bitten in the process, and how the cat had then insisted on accompanying them to the clinic. "That's unusual," Laura commented, her tone a mixture of skepticism and fascination as she monitored the cat's contractions. "Animals surprise us all the time, but this level of interspecies cooperation is remarkable." "I know how it sounds," Jack acknowledged, checking Duke's vital signs again. "If I hadn't seen it myself, I wouldn't believe it either." The next hour passed in a blur of medical procedures and careful monitoring. Duke remained stable but critical, his powerful body fighting against the toxins that threatened to shut down his vital systems. The anti-venom was working, but recovery would be a slow process. Jack stayed by his side, adjusting medications and fluids as needed, speaking softly to his beloved companion. Meanwhile, The cat's labor progressed steadily under Laura's expert care. The first kitten arrived shortly after 3 in the morning, a tiny black and white bundle that the mother immediately began to clean with determined licks. The second and third followed within 20 minutes, both healthy despite the stressful circumstances of their birth. 3 healthy kittens so far, Laura reported, her expression softening as she watched the new mother tend to her offspring. She's doing remarkably well for a stray in an unfamiliar environment. Jack nodded absently, his attention divided between Duke's monitors and the miracle unfolding in the corner of the treatment room. "How many more do you think?" Laura gently palpated the cat's abdomen. "At least 2 more, I'd say. She's young but strong. I think she'll manage fine." As if on cue, the cat began pushing again, delivering her 4th kitten, a tiny calico that resembled her mother. Laura helped clear the newborn's airways, then placed it near the mother's head where she could clean it properly. Throughout this process, something extraordinary was happening with Duke. Despite his weakened state, the German Shepherd seemed aware of the births taking place nearby. Each time a kitten arrived, his tail would thump weakly against the examination table, and his eyes would briefly open, seeking out the source of the tiny mewling sounds that now filled the room. "I've never seen anything like this," Laura admitted, watching as Duke struggled to lift his head when the 5th and final kitten, a ginger tabby, was born. "It's almost as if he feels responsible for them." "Maybe he does," Jack replied thoughtfully. "He put himself between her and that snake. Those kittens might not exist if he hadn't." The cat, now finished with delivery and nursing her 5 newborns, kept glancing toward Duke as if checking on his condition. When Laura stepped away to wash her hands, the new mother did something unexpected. She carefully picked up one of her kittens, the tiny calico, and attempted to move from the nesting box. "Whoa! Where do you think you're going?" Laura exclaimed, quickly but gently intercepting the cat. "Your babies need to stay warm and together." The cat made a soft sound of protest, still clutching the kitten carefully in her mouth. Her intention became clear as she kept trying to move toward Duke. Jack and Laura exchanged bewildered glances. "Is she trying to show him the kitten?" Jack asked, unable to hide his amazement. "I think she is," Laura confirmed, her scientific skepticism momentarily forgotten in the face of such extraordinary behavior. "I've read case studies about interspecies bonding, but this is beyond anything in the literature." After a brief consultation, they decided on a compromise. Jack carefully adjusted Duke's position on the examination table, creating a small space beside him, while Laura brought the entire nesting box closer, positioning it where both Duke and the mother cat could see each other and the kittens. The arrangement seemed to satisfy the cat, who settled back with her litter but maintained visual contact with Duke. The German Shepherd, for his part, seemed more relaxed with the cat family nearby, his breathing becoming slightly more regular as the minutes passed. Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the sky, marking the end of one of the longest nights in Jack's career. As he watched his unusual patience, a dog who had risked his life to save a pregnant cat, and a cat who now seemed determined to include that dog in her family, Jack felt a sense of wonder that transcended his scientific training. "What do we do now?" Laura asked quietly, preparing another round of medications for Duke. "The cat and kittens should be monitored for at least 24 hours, and Duke's recovery will take much longer." Jack ran a hand through his disheveled hair, considering their options. "I'll stay with them today. Melissa won't be back until tomorrow, so I can sleep on the cot in my office between treatments." He glanced at the unusual family that had formed overnight in his clinic. "Something tells me we shouldn't separate them." Laura nodded in agreement, watching as the mother cat gently groomed her kittens while keeping a watchful eye on Duke. "I think you're right. Whatever connection they've formed, it seems to be helping them both." As the first rays of sunlight streamed through the clinic windows, illuminating the remarkable scene of interspecies cooperation and compassion, Jack couldn't help but feel that he was witnessing something profound, a reminder that the bonds of care and protection could transcend the boundaries that supposedly separated different species. "We'll get through this," he promised softly, his words meant for both Duke and the cat family. "All of us, together." The mother cat blinked slowly at him, her amber eyes seeming to hold a wisdom beyond her years, while Duke's tail offered another weak thump of acknowledgement. Despite the critical condition of his patients, Jack felt a surge of optimism. The night had brought unexpected challenges, but also unexpected allies. The morning staff of Oak Ridge Animal Hospital arrived to find an unexpected scene in the main treatment room. Their boss, Dr. Jack Anderson, was slumped in a chair beside the examination table, where Duke, his German shepherd, lay connected to IV fluids and monitoring equipment. In the corner, a calico cat nursed 5 tiny kittens in a makeshift nesting box, occasionally lifting her head to check on the dog. Dr. Laura Chen, still in her emergency clothes from the night before, was the first to greet them and explain the extraordinary circumstances. The receptionist and vet techs listened in growing amazement as Laura recounted how Duke had protected the pregnant cat from a snake, sustaining a potentially fatal bite in the process, and how the cat had then insisted on accompanying them to the clinic before giving birth. "I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't seen it myself," Laura concluded, rubbing her tired eyes. "But there's definitely some kind of bond between them. Jack thinks we shouldn't separate them during recovery." Rebecca Monroe, the head veterinary technician who had worked with Jack for over a decade, approached Duke cautiously. She had helped train the German shepherd as a puppy and had a special relationship with him. "How's he doing?" she asked, gently stroking his head. "Better than expected, given the severity of the envenomation," Laura replied. "The antivenom is working, but he's not out of the woods yet. The next 24 hours will be critical." Jack stirred at the sound of their voices, blinking away exhaustion as he straightened in his chair. "Morning," he mumbled, immediately checking Duke's vitals with the instinctive movement of a concerned owner and veterinarian. "You should get some proper rest," Rebecca suggested, her tone gentle but firm. "We can monitor Duke and the cat family." Jack shook his head stubbornly. "I need to be here if his condition changes." He glanced toward the cat and her kittens. "And our unexpected feline patients need monitoring too. The birth went well, but they're all undoubtedly stressed." Rebecca knew better than to argue. Instead, she began her morning duties, preparing fresh bedding for the cat family and checking their condition with practiced hands. To everyone's surprise, the mother cat allowed these examinations without protest, seeming to understand that the humans were trying to help. "She's remarkably trusting for a stray," Rebecca observed, carefully weighing each kitten to establish baseline health data. "Most feral cats would be hissing and scratching by now." "There's nothing ordinary about any of this," Jack replied, moving stiffly to Duke's side to check his wound. The swelling had increased overnight, a common progression with snake bites, but the tissue didn't show signs of necrosis, a positive indication that the antivenom was doing its job. As the morning progressed, the clinic attempted to maintain its regular schedule of appointments while accommodating the special needs of their unusual patients. Jack insisted on personally overseeing Duke's treatment, administering additional antivenom and adjusting his pain medication as needed. The German shepherd drifted in and out of consciousness, his powerful body weakened by the toxins but fighting hard. Around noon, something unexpected happened. Duke, who had been mostly unresponsive for hours, suddenly became agitated. His heart rate increased and he attempted to lift his head despite his weakness. Jack was immediately at his side, concerned that the dog might be having an adverse reaction to the treatment. "Easy, Duke. What's wrong, boy?" he asked, checking the monitors for any signs of distress. The answer came from the corner of the room. The mother cat was pacing anxiously around her nesting box, meowing with increasing urgency. When Rebecca approached to check on her, she discovered that one of the kittens, the smallest one, a little grey tabby, was struggling to breathe. "Jack, we've got a critical kitten here," Rebecca called out, already reaching for an oxygen mask scaled for neonatal care. Despite his own critical condition, Duke's agitation seemed directly connected to the kitten's distress. He kept trying to turn his head toward the nesting box, whining softly as Jack rushed to help Rebecca with the struggling newborn. "Possible congenital issue," Jack muttered, his experienced hands gently examining the tiny creature that fit easily. In his palm, "Respiratory system isn't fully developed. Get the incubator ready." The mother cat watched anxiously as Jack and Rebecca worked to save her kitten, her amber eyes following their every movement. Unlike most new mothers who would growl or attempt to reclaim their offspring from human handlers, she seemed to understand that her baby needed help beyond what she could provide. The next hour was tense as the team worked to stabilize the fragile kitten. They placed it in an oxygen-rich incubator, administered tiny doses of medication to strengthen its lungs, and used a minuscule feeding tube to ensure it received nutrition. Throughout this process, both Duke and the mother cat remained unusually alert, as if monitoring the medical intervention. "I've never seen anything like this," Laura commented, having returned to the clinic after a few hours of rest at home. "The interspecies awareness they're showing defies conventional understanding of animal behavior." Jack nodded thoughtfully, watching as the mother cat divided her attention between her 4 healthy kittens and the one in the incubator, which had been placed where she could see it through the clear plastic walls. "It's as if they've formed some kind of family unit. Duke seems to feel responsible for all of them." Indeed, whenever the sick kitten made even the slightest sound of distress, Duke would immediately respond with a whine of his own, despite his weakened state. The mother cat would then approach the incubator, placing a paw against the plastic as if to comfort her struggling baby. As evening approached, Jack faced a difficult decision. The clinic would be closing soon, with only the overnight emergency staff remaining. Duke needed to stay for continued monitoring and treatment, but what about the cat and her kittens? Protocol would suggest moving them to the recovery ward, separated from the main treatment area where Duke was stationed. "I don't think we should separate them," Laura advised, observing how Duke's vital signs seemed to stabilize whenever the mother cat approached his bed. "There's something therapeutic about their interaction." Jack agreed, though he knew it defied conventional veterinary practice. "We'll keep them together tonight. Rebecca, can you set up a more permanent nesting area for the cat family near Duke Station and make sure the overnight staff understands the unique situation?" Rebecca nodded, already gathering supplies. "What are we calling them in the records? We need names for the charts." Jack paused, realizing he hadn't thought about naming the cat or her kittens. "The mother cat. Let's call her Hope," he decided, watching as she groomed her kittens with dedicated attention. "It seems fitting, given the circumstances." "And the kittens," Laura prompted. "Let's wait on naming them until we're sure all 5 will make it," Jack replied, his gaze moving to the incubator where the smallest kitten was still fighting for each breath. One step at a time. As the day staff prepared to leave, Jack made one final check of Duke's condition. The German Shepherd's vital signs had improved slightly, though he remained seriously ill. The wound site was still severely swollen, and his once powerful body seemed diminished against the white treatment table. "You're doing great, buddy," Jack assured him, gently stroking his head. "Just keep fighting." Duke's tail thumped weakly against the table, a small but significant sign of his continuing awareness and spirit. His eyes, though clouded with pain, sought out Jack's face, then shifted to where Hope and her kittens were now settled in a more comfortable arrangement near his bed. "Yes, they're all still here," Jack confirmed, following Duke's gaze. "Your new friends are safe." As if understanding these words, Duke seemed to relax slightly, his breathing becoming more even. Hope, from her new nesting box, watched this interaction with that same uncanny awareness she had displayed throughout this strange ordeal. Jack finally agreed to go home for a few hours of proper rest, leaving Duke and the cat family in Rebecca's capable hands. She had volunteered to stay through the night, unwilling to entrust these special patients to the regular emergency staff who might not understand the unusual dynamics at play. "Call me if anything changes with any of them," Jack instructed, as he reluctantly prepared to leave. "I'll be back before midnight to check on the little one in the incubator." "We'll be fine," Rebecca assured him, already settling into the monitoring routine. "Get some rest. Duke and Hope have been through the worst of it." Jack nodded, though his concern remained evident as he glanced back at his patients one final time before leaving. In the quiet of the treatment room, with most of the staff gone for the day, an extraordinary scene unfolded. A German shepherd, who had nearly sacrificed his life for a pregnant stray cat, now recovering alongside her and her newborn kittens, all of them somehow aware of their unusual bond. At the Anderson home, Jack found it nearly impossible to rest despite his exhaustion. The house felt eerily empty without Duke's reassuring presence. As he tried to sleep, his mind kept returning to the remarkable events of the past 24 hours. In his 15 years as a veterinarian, he had witnessed countless examples of animal intelligence and compassion, but nothing that approached the level of awareness and connection that Duke and Hope were displaying. His phone rang shortly after. In 10 o'clock, jolting him from a fitful doze, it was Rebecca. "Jack, you need to come back," she said, her voice urgent but not panicked. "Duke's taken a turn." "Is he worse?" Jack asked, already reaching for his shoes, his heart pounding with sudden fear. "Not exactly," Rebecca replied, her tone now containing a note of bewilderment. "It's hard to explain. You just need to see this for yourself." Jack made the drive back to the clinic in record time, his mind racing through possible scenarios. Had Duke developed an allergic reaction to the anti-venom? Was there a secondary infection setting in? The possibilities were numerous and frightening. When he arrived, however, he found a scene very different from what he had feared. Duke was awake, more alert than he had been since the snakebite, and making determined attempts to move closer to the incubator containing the struggling kitten, which had been placed on a table near his bed for monitoring. "He started this about 20 minutes ago," Rebecca explained, watching as Duke strained against his weakness. His vitals actually improved as he became more active. "It's like he's refusing to give in to the venom because he's worried about the kitten." What made the scene even more remarkable was Hope's behavior. The mother cat had positioned herself halfway between her healthy kittens in the nesting box and the incubator containing her sick baby. She alternated between checking on both, but she also kept returning to Duke's side, rubbing her head against his muzzle in what seemed like encouragement. "I've never seen anything like it," Rebecca admitted. "It's as if they're communicating on some level we can't understand." Jack approached Duke carefully, checking his vitals and the condition of the snakebite. To his amazement, the swelling had begun to subside slightly, a sign that Duke's system was finally gaining ground against the venom's effects. "His immune response is stronger than expected," Jack noted, reviewing the monitoring charts. "And his blood values are trending in the right direction." "Do you think it's possible that his determination to help the kittens is actually accelerating his recovery?" Rebecca asked, her scientific training at odds with what she was witnessing. Jack considered this as he watched Duke's continued efforts to move closer to the struggling kitten. The mind-body connection in recovery is well documented, even in veterinary medicine. Animals with a strong will to live often survive injuries that should be fatal. If Duke has somehow bonded with these kittens— He didn't finish the thought, but Rebecca understood. They were witnessing something extraordinary, something that challenged the boundaries of conventional veterinary knowledge. After some discussion, They decided to carefully move the incubator closer to Duke's bed, where both he and Hope could see it more easily. The effect was immediate and remarkable. Duke settled, his agitation decreasing as he was able to keep watch over the tiny patient. Without straining, Hope too seemed relieved by this arrangement, dividing her attention more comfortably between her healthy kittens and her struggling baby. Throughout the night, Jack and Rebecca monitored this unusual family unit, documenting the remarkable interactions they observed. Duke would whine softly whenever the kitten in the incubator showed signs of distress, alerting the humans to check on it before the monitoring equipment even registered a problem. Hope would move between her healthy kittens and Duke's side, occasionally reaching a paw toward the incubator as if reassuring her sick baby that she was nearby. "It's like they've formed their own little medical team," Rebecca commented during one of these episodes. "Duke alerts us, Hope provides comfort, and we provide the technical support." Jack nodded, too fascinated by what he was witnessing to dismiss it as mere anthropomorphism. "There's something profound happening here," he agreed. "Something that goes beyond our understanding of animal behavior." As dawn approached, the struggling kitten showed signs of improvement. Its breathing had become more regular, and it had begun to take formula from the feeding tube with more vigor. Jack cautiously upgraded its prognosis from critical to guarded, still serious, but with hope for recovery. Duke, too, was showing remarkable improvement. His vitals had stabilized, the swelling around the bite had noticeably decreased, and he was more alert and responsive than anyone had expected at this stage of recovery. It was almost as if his determination to protect Hope and her kittens had given him an extra reservoir of strength to draw upon. When the morning staff arrived, they found Jack and Rebecca tired but triumphant, watching over their unusual patient. Family, with a mixture of professional interest and personal wonder. "They all made it through the night," Jack reported to Laura as she came in to relieve him, "including our little fighter in the incubator." Laura examined the kitten carefully, her expression reflecting her surprise at its improved condition. "Remarkable," she murmured. "I honestly didn't expect this one to survive." "I think we have Duke to thank for that," Rebecca said, nodding. Toward the German shepherd, who was now resting more comfortably, his watchful gaze still occasionally moving to check on the incubator. He refused to give up on it, and somehow that made all the difference. As Jack prepared to go home for a few hours of much-needed rest, he received an unexpected call from his wife, Melissa, who was on her way back from her conference. "How's everything at home?" she asked cheerfully, unaware of the drama that had unfolded in her absence. Jack hesitated, trying to figure out how to explain the extraordinary circumstances that awaited her return. "Well," he began slowly, "we have some new house guests. You need to know about..." As he recounted the remarkable story of Duke's heroism and the unlikely family that had formed in its aftermath, Melissa's initial surprise gave way to understanding. She had always known that Duke was special. That was why she had supported Jack's decision to adopt him from the shelter 3 years ago, despite the German shepherd's history of being difficult with other animals. "So, let me get this straight," she said when he finished. "Our Duke, who normally chases every cat out of our yard, saved a pregnant stray from a snake, got bitten in the process, and is now acting as co-parent to her 5 kittens. "That's about the size of it," Jack confirmed, unable to keep a note of wonder from his voice. "You have to see it to believe it, Mel. It's like they've transcended their natural instincts to form something extraordinary." There was a moment of silence before Melissa replied, her voice warm with affection and pride. "Of course they have. Duke has always been extraordinary, and it sounds like he's found a worthy partner in Hope." Jack felt a rush of gratitude for his wife's understanding. "So you're okay with them coming home with us once they've recovered? Hope and the kittens, I mean." "Jack Anderson, did you really think I'd say no to that?" Melissa chuckled. "I'm already making a shopping list of what we'll need for them, and I expect a full introduction to each kitten when I get home this afternoon." As Jack ended the call, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The future still held many uncertainties. Duke's full recovery was far from guaranteed, and the weakest kitten remained in a precarious state. But they would face these challenges together as a family expanded in ways none of them could have anticipated. He looked back at Duke one last time before leaving. The German Shepherd was resting more comfortably now, his breathing steady and his eyes clearer than they had been since the snake bite. Hope had curled up beside him, her small body pressed against his much larger one in a gesture of trust and comfort that defied their natural instincts. "You did good, buddy," Jack murmured. "You did real good." Duke's tail thumped weakly in response, his eyes meeting Jack's with a depth of understanding that transcended the boundary between human and animal. In that moment, Jack knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, an expanded family united by an act of courage and compassion that had defied the natural order and created something truly remarkable in its place. The days that followed at Oak Ridge Animal Hospital were filled with a delicate balance of hope and uncertainty. Duke's condition improved incrementally, each small victory celebrated by the staff who had become deeply invested in his recovery. The swelling around his shoulder had begun to recede, and his blood work showed promising signs that his organs were recovering from the toxic assault. Yet Jack knew better than to declare victory too soon. Snake venom, particularly from copperheads, could cause damage that manifested days or even weeks after the initial bite. Tissue necrosis, kidney complications, and neurological effects were all still possible, keeping Duke firmly in the guarded category despite his apparent improvements. Hope and her kittens provided a contrasting trajectory of recovery. The 4 healthy kittens thrived under their mother's attentive care, growing stronger and more active with each passing day. Their tiny eyes had opened, revealing a world that consisted primarily of their mother, each other, and the large, gentle presence of Duke, who remained a constant in their limited experience. The 5th kitten, the runt that had struggled from birth, remained in the incubator, fighting its own battle for survival. Jack had named it Chance, acknowledging the uncertain odds it faced. Despite its fragility, the tiny creature showed a remarkable persistence that earned the respect of everyone at the clinic. "He's a fighter, just like Duke," Melissa observed on her 3rd visit to the clinic. She had taken to stopping by twice daily, bringing home-cooked meals for Jack and treats for the staff who were going above and beyond for their unusual patients. Jack nodded in agreement, watching as Melissa gently stroked the tiny kitten through the incubator's access ports. "His lungs are getting stronger. If he makes it through the weekend, I think he has a real shot." It was Friday afternoon, marking nearly a week since the fateful night when Duke had encountered Hope in their backyard. The story of their unusual bond had spread throughout the small town of Oak Ridge, bringing a steady stream of well-wishers to the clinic. Jack had been forced to limit visitors to protect his patients, but the front desk overflowed with get-well cards, dog treats, and even hand-knitted cat beds from community members touched by the story. "You've become local celebrities," Laura teased as she checked Duke's vitals. "The Gazette wants to do a feature story, something about unlikely heroes and the bonds that transcend species." Jack groaned, though there was no real annoyance behind it. "Just what we need, reporters disturbing our patients." "I think it's sweet," Melissa countered, her expression softening as she watched Hope groom Duke's muzzle, a daily ritual that seemed to comfort them both. "People need stories like this, Jack, reminders that compassion can cross boundaries we think are fixed." Before Jack could respond, Rebecca entered the treatment room with an urgent expression. "Jack, we've got a problem with Duke's latest blood work. The veterinarian's professional demeanor snapped into place immediately as he took the charts from Rebecca's hand. His expression grew serious as he reviewed the numbers. "His kidney values are climbing again," he noted, concern evident in his voice. "And these platelet counts are worrying." "Delayed reaction to the venom," Laura suggested, moving to examine the results herself. "Possibly, or a secondary infection developing in the wound site." Jack gently pulled back the bandage on Duke's shoulder, revealing the healing puncture marks from the snake's fangs. The area was less swollen, but showed concerning discoloration around the edges. "We need to start him on a stronger antibiotic regimen and increase his fluids." The atmosphere in the room shifted as the medical team sprang into action, preparing the necessary treatments. Melissa stepped back to give them space, her face etched with worry as she watched her husband work with focused intensity. What happened next surprised everyone. As Jack prepared to administer the new medications, Hope suddenly leaped onto Duke's treatment table, positioning herself protectively beside the German shepherd's head. Her fur was slightly raised, and her body language clearly communicated that she didn't want them touching Duke. "Hope?" Jack said softly, surprised by this uncharacteristic display from the normally cooperative cat. "We need to help him, girl." Hope didn't budge. Instead, she placed one paw gently on Duke's muzzle and meowed insistently at Jack, her amber eyes seemingly trying to convey something beyond their comprehension. "I've never seen her do that before," Rebecca remarked, equally puzzled by this behavior. Jack hesitated, his professional training momentarily at odds with the strange dynamic he had witnessed between these two animals over the past week. "Let's try something," he said finally. "Rebecca, bring the portable ultrasound." While they waited, Jack carefully examined Duke again, paying special attention to areas Hope seemed most concerned about. When his fingers probed a spot just below the original bite wound, Duke winced visibly, and Hope's meowing intensified. "There's something here," Jack murmured, feeling a subtle swelling that had been hidden by the more obvious trauma of the bite itself. When Rebecca returned with the ultrasound machine, he applied the gel and ran the probe over the area. The image that appeared on the screen confirmed his suspicion. "There's a pocket forming," he announced, pointing to a dark area on the display. "Probably a fluid buildup from damaged tissue. It wasn't visible in our earlier examinations because of the general swelling, but it could be the source of the infection indicators in his blood work." Laura leaned in to examine the image. "We should drain it immediately." "Agreed." Jack looked at Hope with newfound respect. "You knew something was wrong there, didn't you? Something we missed." The cat blinked slowly at him before settling more comfortably beside Duke, seemingly satisfied that her message had been received. The procedure to drain the fluid pocket was relatively simple, but required precision. Jack carefully inserted a fine needle into the affected area, drawing out a syringe of cloudy fluid that confirmed his diagnosis of a developing abscess. "Good call, Hope," Laura said with a shake of her head as they sent the fluid sample to the lab for culture. "I'm starting to think we should put her on staff." The atmosphere in the treatment room lightened as Duke showed immediate signs of relief following the procedure. His breathing eased, and some of the tension left his powerful frame. Hope remained by his side throughout, occasionally grooming his ears in what seemed like a comforting gesture. "I've heard of animals sensing illness in humans," Melissa commented as she watched this interaction. "Dogs who can detect cancers or predict seizures, but I've never heard of one animal diagnosing another like that. And there's a lot we don't understand about animal cognition and empathy," Jack admitted, disposing of his gloves after completing Duke's treatment. "Hope and Duke are challenging a lot of what we thought we knew." As evening approached, the clinic prepared to close for the weekend. Duke's condition would require continued monitoring, meaning someone needed to stay overnight with him and the cat family. Jack had been taking most of these shifts himself, catching sleep on the cot in his office between treatments, but the strain was beginning to show on his face. "You need a proper night's sleep," Melissa insisted as they discussed the arrangements. "You can't help Duke if you collapse from exhaustion." "I can't leave him," Jack protested, though his argument was undermined by the dark circles under his eyes. "If that infection takes hold overnight—" "I'll stay," Rebecca volunteered, entering the conversation. "I've monitored his treatment plan from the beginning, and I know what to watch for." Laura nodded in agreement. "And I'll come in early tomorrow morning to relieve her. You need to rest, Jack. Doctor's orders." Outnumbered, Jack reluctantly agreed to go home for the night, though not before conducting one final examination of all his patients. Duke was resting more comfortably after the fluid drainage, his temperature slightly elevated, but not alarmingly so. Hope and her 4 healthy kittens were thriving, the little ones having graduated to exploring the limits of their enclosure under their mother's watchful eye. Chance, the struggling 5th kitten, had shown small but significant improvements. He was taking formula more consistently and had gained precious grams that increased his chances of survival. Jack transferred him from the incubator to a smaller warming unit that could be placed closer to Hope, allowing her more access to her fragile offspring, while still providing the medical support he needed. "You've got the emergency number," Jack reminded Rebecca for the 3rd time as he prepared to leave. "Call if there's any change, anything at all." "Go home, Jack," Rebecca replied with fond exasperation. "We've got this under control." The drive home felt strange after so many nights spent at the clinic. The Anderson house was quiet and slightly dusty after a week of minimal occupation. Melissa moved around the space with practiced efficiency, opening windows to let in fresh air while Jack showered away the antiseptic smell of the hospital. As they sat down to their first proper meal together in days, Melissa brought up the question they had both been avoiding. "What happens when they're all well enough to leave the clinic?" she asked, watching Jack's expression carefully. "Hope and the kittens, I mean." Jack took a thoughtful sip of his wine before answering. "Technically, Hope is a stray. Standard procedure would be to check for a microchip or owner, then put her and the kittens up for adoption when they're old enough." "And if no owner comes forward?" Melissa pressed, though they both knew where this conversation was heading. A smile tugged at the corner of Jack's mouth. "Then I suppose we'd need to find them a good home, preferably one with experience handling animals and a certain German shepherd who seems quite attached to them." Melissa's face lit up with a relieved smile. "So, we're keeping them?" "Did you ever doubt it?" Jack reached across the table to take her hand. "After what Hope did for Duke, after everything they've been through together, I couldn't separate them now." "All 6 of them," Melissa clarified, her smile widening. "Hope and all 5 kittens." Jack nodded, committing fully to the idea. "All 6. Assuming Chance makes it, and I'm increasingly hopeful that he will. We'll need to make some adjustments around the house, but I think we can manage." Melissa's eyes sparkled with happiness. "Our own little blended family. Duke would be miserable without them now, I think." "And vice versa," Jack agreed, thinking of how Hope consistently sought out Duke's presence, how she seemed to draw comfort from his proximity. "It's like they've formed a bond that goes beyond instinct or training, something deeper." They spent the evening planning the necessary arrangements for their expanded household, a cat tree in the living room, feeding stations that would be accessible to Hope, but not the overly curious kittens, safe spaces for when the inevitable adjustment period led to temporary tensions. For the first time in a week, Jack slept deeply, the combination of exhaustion and resolution about the future, finally allowing his mind to rest. When the phone rang early the next morning, he was momentarily disoriented, taking a few seconds to place himself in his own bedroom rather than the clinic office. "Dr. Anderson," he answered automatically, his heart rate spiking as he remembered that Rebecca was supposed to call only in case of emergency. "Jack, "It's Rebecca." Her voice was tight with controlled urgency. "You need to come in right away. Duke's taken a turn for the worse." Fully awake now, Jack was already reaching for his clothes. What happened? His fever spiked around 4 a.m. and he's showing signs of increased pain. The lab called with the culture results from that fluid. It's a resistant strain of bacteria. We've started him on the appropriate antibiotics, but he's struggling. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, Jack promised, ending the call and turning to find Melissa already dressed and holding his keys. "Go," she said simply. "I'll follow with coffee and breakfast for everyone." The drive to the clinic felt interminable, though in reality it took less than the promised 15 minutes. When Jack arrived, he found Laura already there, having been called in by Rebecca when Duke's condition deteriorated. The scene in the treatment room was sobering. Duke lay panting on his bed, his eyes glazed with fever and pain, despite the medications they had administered. Hope was clearly distressed, pacing between her kittens and Duke with increasing agitation. "Temperature's 104.2, Laura reported, as Jack quickly donned examination gloves. "White cell count is through the roof. The antibiotics haven't had time to take effect yet." Jack nodded grimly as he checked Duke's swollen shoulder. The area around the drainage site was hot to the touch, suggesting that the infection had spread despite their intervention. Duke whimpered as Jack's gentle fingers probed the wound, his tail offering only the faintest thump of recognition. "We need to get ahead of this," Jack muttered, his mind racing through treatment options. "Let's increase the fluid rate, add an anti-inflammatory, and consider a partial debridement of the infected tissue." Rebecca nodded, already moving to prepare the necessary supplies. "Should we sedate him for the debridement?" "Light sedation only," Jack decided after a moment's consideration. "His system is already compromised. I don't want to stress it further with heavy anesthesia." And as they worked to stabilize Duke's condition, Hope became increasingly distressed. She meowed loudly, attempting to insert herself between the medical team and Duke, clearly agitated by their interventions despite having accepted them calmly in the past. "She knows he's worse," Laura observed, gently moving the cat aside to adjust Duke's IV line. "Animals can sense these things." Jack nodded distractedly, his focus on the urgent task of saving Duke from the infection raging through his system. The next hours would be critical. The powerful antibiotics were Duke's best hope, but they needed time to work, time that Jack wasn't certain they had. The next 48 hours were the most challenging of Jack Anderson's veterinary career. Duke's condition continued to deteriorate despite their best efforts, the infection raging through his system with frightening intensity. The antibiotics that should have been effective against the resistant bacteria seemed to be working too, slowly, leaving Jack and his team fighting a desperate battle against time. "His kidney values are still climbing," Laura reported grimly as she reviewed the latest blood work. "And his platelets are dangerously low. We need to consider a plasma transfusion." Jack nodded, his face drawn with fatigue and worry. He had barely left Duke's side in the 2 days since the crisis began, catching moments of rest in the chair beside the treatment table when exhaustion overcame him. Melissa had taken over coordinating with the rest of the clinic staff, ensuring that other patients received care while the core team focused on Duke's increasingly dire situation. "Let's start the transfusion protocol," Jack agreed, reaching for the phone to call the regional veterinary blood bank. "And increase the fluid rate again. We need to support those kidneys." Throughout this critical period, Hope's behavior had become increasingly unusual. The normally attentive mother had begun dividing her time more equally between her kittens, and Duke, often leaving her healthy offspring to sit beside the suffering dog for hours at a time. The clinic staff had created a special elevated platform beside Duke's bed, where Hope could remain close to him without interfering with the medical equipment. What was most remarkable was how the cat seemed to understand Duke's needs. When his fever spiked, She would press herself against his neck, her smaller body offering cooling comfort. When the pain medications wore off and he grew restless, she would groom his ears and face with gentle licks that seemed to soothe him more effectively than human comfort. "I've never seen anything like it," Rebecca commented during a rare quiet moment when Duke seemed to be resting more comfortably. "It's like she knows exactly what he needs, sometimes before we do." Jack watched as Hope delicately licked Duke's muzzle, her ministrations drawing a faint thump of tail in response. One of the few positive reactions they'd seen from Duke in hours. "Oh, I think she does know," he replied thoughtfully. "There's something about their connection that goes beyond what we understand about animal behavior. She feels what he needs." The plasma transfusion arrived by courier late that afternoon, offering a new hope in their battle to save Duke. As Jack and Laura carefully administered the life-saving fluids, Hope watched from her perch, her amber eyes following every movement with uncanny awareness. "His vitals are stabilizing," Laura noted with cautious optimism as the transfusion progressed. "Blood pressure's coming up and his heart rate is more regular." Jack nodded, allowing himself a small measure of hope for the first time in days. "Let's continue the current antibiotic protocol and add the new anti-inflammatory, if we can get ahead of this infection." He didn't finish the thought, knowing that Duke still faced monumental challenges. The venom had weakened his system significantly, making it harder for him to fight the secondary infection. Recovery, if it came at all, would be a long and uncertain road. As evening fell, Melissa arrived with food for the team and fresh supplies for Hope's kittens. She found Jack sitting beside Duke, his hand resting gently on the German Shepherd's head while Hope pressed close to the dog's side, purring softly. "How is he?" Melissa asked quietly, setting down her bags and moving to her husband's side. "Holding his own," Jack replied, the caution in his voice reflecting the fragility of Duke's condition. "The transfusion has helped stabilize him, but the infection is still a major concern." Melissa nodded, her eyes moving to Hope. "And how's our cat mama doing?" "Extraordinary," Jack said, his voice containing a note of wonder despite his exhaustion. "She's barely left his side all day. Even when her kittens cry for her, she only leaves long enough to feed them before returning to Duke." "And Chance?" Melissa asked, referring to the smallest kitten who had been struggling since birth. A small smile touched Jack's lips for the first time in days. "Actually improving. His weight's up, and his breathing is stronger. I think he might make it." After all, this small victory provided a much-needed boost to everyone's spirits. As the night staff arrived to take over monitoring duties, Jack finally allowed himself to be persuaded to go home for a few hours of proper rest, though not before checking each of his patients one final time. Duke remained critical but stable, his powerful body fighting against the infection with every resource it had left. Hope had settled in for the night on her special platform, positioned so that she could reach Duke's face with her gentle grooming while still keeping an eye on her kittens in their nearby enclosure. The 4 healthy kittens slept in a contented pile, growing stronger daily, while Chance rested in his warming unit, small but determined. "Call me if there's any change," Jack instructed the night nurse, his eyes lingering on Duke's sleeping form. "Anything at all." "We will," she promised. "Now go get some sleep, Dr. Anderson. You're no good to any of them if you collapse." The drive home passed in a blur of exhaustion. Jack barely remembered reaching the bedroom before falling into a deep, dreamless sleep that lasted until his phone rang just before dawn. He answered immediately, his heart pounding with fear at what the call might bring. "Dr. Anderson?" "It's Amy from the night shift." The nurse's voice contained a note he couldn't immediately identify. "You need to come in right away." "Is Duke worse?" Jack asked, already reaching for his clothes. There was a pause before Amy replied, her tone puzzled. "That's just it, Dr. Anderson. He's not worse, he's better. Much better. His fever broke around 3 a.m. and his latest blood work shows significant improvement in all values. It's like he turned a corner overnight. Relief flooded through Jack with such intensity that he had to sit down on the edge of the bed. "I'll be right there," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. When he arrived at the clinic 20 minutes later, Jack found a scene that seemed impossible given Duke's condition the previous evening. The German Shepherd was awake and alert, his eyes clear for the first time in days. The swelling around his shoulder had visibly decreased, and his breathing was deep and regular, rather than the labored panting that had characterized his struggle against infection. His temperatures, down to 101.5, Amy reported, handing Jack the overnight charts. White count is dropping, kidney values improving, and he actually ate a little soft food about an hour ago. Jack reviewed the numbers in amazement. "This kind of turnaround is unusual," he said, the understatement evident in his voice. "What about his pain levels?" "Much lower based on his behavior and responsiveness," Amy confirmed. "He's still weak, but the improvement is remarkable." As Jack approached to examine Duke more thoroughly, he noticed something that stopped him in his tracks. Hope was curled up against Duke's neck, sleeping peacefully, while one of her kittens, the tiny calico that resembled her, had somehow escaped the enclosure and was nestled in the curve of Duke's front leg. "The kitten got out during the night," Amy explained, following Jack's gaze. "I was going to put it back, but Duke seemed so happy to have it there, and Hope didn't object, so I left them." Jack nodded slowly, watching as Duke gently shifted position to accommodate the tiny kitten, more comfortably without disturbing it. "When did this happen?" "Around 3 a.m., Amy replied, "right around the time his fever broke." The significance wasn't lost on Jack. He approached carefully, checking Duke's vital signs and examining the wound site, which showed dramatic improvement overnight. The angry redness had subsided, and the drainage was clear rather than cloudy with infection. "Hey, buddy," Jack said softly, stroking Duke's head, "you're looking a lot better this morning." Duke's tail thumped weakly against the bed in response, and he turned his head slightly to lick Jack's hand, a gesture of recognition and affection that had been absent during the worst of his illness. Hope stirred at the movement, stretching languidly before fixing Jack with her intelligent amber eyes. "I think she's saying, 'I told you so,'" Amy commented with a smile. She never seemed to doubt he'd recover. By mid-morning, the entire team had gathered to witness Duke's remarkable improvement. Laura conducted a thorough examination, confirming what the overnight stats had suggested. Duke had indeed turned a corner in his battle against the infection. "His immune system has finally gained the upper hand," she concluded, reviewing the latest test results. "The antibiotics are working now, and the supportive care has given his body what it needed to fight back." "But what triggered this sudden improvement?" Rebecca asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. "Yesterday, he was failing despite everything we were doing. What changed overnight?" All eyes turned to where Duke now rested more comfortably, Hope still by his side, and the escaped kitten still nestled against him. 2 more kittens had been carefully introduced to Duke's bed at Hope's apparent insistence. She had carried them there herself, and now explored their newfound freedom under the watchful eyes of both mother and canine guardian. "Maybe it was Hope," Melissa suggested quietly from the doorway, having arrived with breakfast for the team. "Maybe she gave him something we couldn't, a reason to fight harder." Jack nodded thoughtfully, watching as Duke gently nudged an adventurous kitten back from the edge of the bed with his nose. "The mind-body connection in healing is powerful," he acknowledged, "and their bond is extraordinary." The improvement continued throughout the day, with each hour bringing new signs of Duke's returning strength. By evening, he was able to sit up briefly, accepting small amounts of food and water directly from Jack's hand, while Hope supervised the process with apparent approval. Chance, too, continued his own journey toward recovery. The smallest kitten had graduated from the warming unit to a special padded basket that could be placed directly beside his siblings, allowing him to experience their warmth and comfort while still receiving the extra support he needed. 2 miracle recoveries in 1 week, Laura remarked as she prepared to leave for the day. Not bad for a small-town veterinary clinic. Jack smiled, some of the weight of worry finally lifting from his shoulders. We're not out of the woods yet, but I'm starting to believe they're both going to make it. They all will, Melissa corrected gently, indicating the entire unusual family that had formed in the wake of Duke's heroic act. The following days brought steady improvement for both Duke and Chance. The German Shepherd's strength returned, gradually allowing him longer periods of sitting up and eventually brief supported walks around the treatment room. The infection retreated completely under the combined assault of antibiotics and Duke's reinvigorated immune system. Chance gained weight consistently, his tiny body growing stronger as his lungs developed the capacity he had lacked at birth. He remained smaller than his siblings, but made up for his size with determination, fighting for his place when nursing and exploring his expanding world with boundless curiosity. 2 weeks after the critical night when Duke had nearly succumbed to infection, Jack made the decision they had all been anticipating. "I think it's time to take them home," he announced during the morning staff meeting. "Duke's recovery can continue there, and Hope and the kittens have outgrown their space here." The prospect of releasing their unusual patients brought mixed emotions for the clinic staff who had become deeply attached to the remarkable family. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a bond between natural adversaries that had not only saved lives, but had also challenged everything they thought they understood about animal behavior and relationships. "We've prepared a special recovery area in the sunroom," Melissa explained, sharing photos of the space they had created at home. "It gets morning light, has plenty of room for Duke's bed and a cat tree for Hope, and we can secure it to keep the kittens safe while they're still so small." The transfer took place on a bright spring morning with Jack personally overseeing every detail. Duke was still weak, but able to walk to the car with minimal support, his tail wagging with what seemed like anticipation. Hope supervised the careful transportation of her kittens, including Chance, who, no longer required special medical support but would need continued monitoring. The homecoming was a moment Jack would remember for the rest of his life. As he guided Duke into the sunroom, the German Shepherd seemed to stand taller, his familiar surroundings giving him renewed energy. Hope promptly inspected every inch of the space before approving it with a soft purr, while the kittens were placed in a specially designed playpen where they could safely explore their new environment. "Welcome home, everyone," Melissa said, softly, watching as Duke settled onto his orthopedic bed with a contented sigh. Hope immediately jumped up beside him, rubbing her head against his muzzle in what had become their familiar greeting. Over the following weeks, the Anderson household adjusted to its expanded family. Duke's recovery continued steadily, his strength returning more each day. Hope proved to be an exceptionally patient mother, allowing her growing kittens to explore under the watchful eyes of both herself and Duke, who had taken his role as co-guardian with surprising seriousness. Chance, the littlest fighter, thrived in the home environment. Though he remained smaller than his siblings, his personality emerged as the boldest of the litter. He was invariably the first to explore new areas, the first to attempt climbing the cat tree, and, most remarkably, the most attached to Duke. He often abandoned the kitten playpen to curl up against the German Shepherd's side, a position Duke carefully accommodated even as he regained his mobility. "It's like he knows," Melissa observed one evening as they watched this special bond develop. "Like he understands that Duke saved his mother's life before he was even born." Jack nodded thoughtfully. "There's so much we don't understand about how animals perceive and remember. Maybe he does know in his own way." As spring turned to summer, Duke regained enough strength to resume gentle walks around the neighborhood, though Jack remained vigilant for any signs of fatigue or pain. The story of Duke and Hope had spread throughout Oak Ridge, making them minor celebrities. Neighbors would often stop to greet Duke and inquire about his feline family, expressing wonder at the unusual bond they had formed. The kittens, now 3 months old, had developed distinct personalities and relationships with their canine guardian. While all 5 interacted with Duke, it was Chance who maintained the closest bond, often following the German Shepherd around the house and yard like a devoted shadow. "We need to start thinking about adoptions for the other kittens," Jack mentioned, one evening as they watched the growing felines tumble around the living room. "They're old enough now to go to good homes." Melissa nodded in agreement, though there was a hint of sadness in her expression. "Except Chance," she clarified. "He stays with Duke." "Of course," Jack confirmed without hesitation. "And Hope, too. They're family now." Finding homes for the other 4 kittens proved surprisingly easy. Word of their remarkable origin story had created a waiting list of potential adopters, eager to welcome a member of the miracle litter into their homes. Jack and Melissa carefully screened each application, determined to find families who would appreciate not just the novelty of the kitten's background, but would provide loving, permanent homes. The day the first kitten left was emotional for everyone, especially Hope, who seemed to understand what was happening. She groomed her offspring thoroughly before the new family arrived, then watched with a mixture of anxiety and resignation as her baby was gently placed in a carrier. Duke's response was equally remarkable. He positioned himself beside Hope during each adoption, offering what could only be described as moral support. He would gently nuzzle her after each kitten departed, staying close as she adjusted to the gradually emptying nest. When the 4th kitten had been adopted, leaving only Chance behind, Hope seemed to go through a brief period of mourning. She spent hours searching the house, calling for her absent babies. It was Duke who comforted her during this difficult transition, allowing her to curl up against him and offering the steady reassurance of his presence. Gradually, a new normal established itself in the Anderson household. Hope accepted that. Chance would be her only remaining kitten, focusing her maternal energy on him while developing a more equal relationship with Duke. The 3 animals formed a tight-knit unit, often found sleeping together in a pile of fur on Duke's large bed, or grooming one another in the patches of sunlight that moved across the living room floor. 6 months after the fateful night when Duke had confronted a venomous snake to protect a pregnant stray, Jack sat on the back porch watching his unusual family enjoy the autumn sunshine. Duke, fully recovered though with a small scar still visible on his shoulder, played a gentle game of chase with Chance, now a sleek young cat who retained his kitten-like enthusiasm for life. Hope supervised from her perch on the porch railing, her amber eyes reflecting contentment and security. "Penny for your thoughts," Melissa said, joining Jack with 2 mugs of coffee. He accepted the drink with a smile, his gaze still on the animals. "I was just thinking about how close we came to losing them both, Duke and Chance. How many times during those weeks I thought we might lose the fight." Melissa nodded, understanding the weight of those memories. "But we didn't lose them. They fought through it, together." "That's just it," Jack replied thoughtfully. "I think that's why they survived. Because they were fighting for each other, not just themselves. Duke had saved Hope, and she wasn't going to let him go without a fight. And Chance, I think he held on because both of them needed him to." They sat in companionable silence, watching as Duke gently shepherded Chance back toward the porch when the young cat ventured too close to the property line. Hope jumped down to meet them, rubbing against Duke's leg in apparent approval of his guardianship. "You know," Melissa said after a while, "people keep asking me if we're going to write up Duke and Hope's case for one of the veterinary journals, a scientific account of interspecies bonding and its effects on recovery." Jack considered this, watching as his unusual family settled into a contented pile at the base of an oak tree. "Maybe someday," he replied. "But I don't think science has all the language yet to explain what happened between them. Some bonds transcend our understanding. They can only be witnessed and honored." Hope looked up at that moment, her amber eyes meeting Jack's across the yard with that same uncanny awareness she had displayed from the beginning. Beside her, Duke's tail thumped contentedly against the ground, while Chance purred loudly enough to be heard from the porch. In that peaceful moment, Jack felt a profound gratitude for the unexpected family that had formed through an act of courage and compassion. A German shepherd who had risked everything to protect a vulnerable stranger, a cat who had refused to abandon her savior in his time of need, and a tiny kitten who had fought against impossible odds to join the remarkable bond they shared. Some connections, Jack reflected, were simply meant to be, transcending the boundaries of species, instinct, and expectation to create something truly extraordinary. A family united not by blood, but by the purest forms of courage, loyalty, and love. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Duke, Hope, and Little Chance has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories about the extraordinary bonds that can form between the most unexpected companions. Find it by clicking on the link to your left. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of life and the connections that truly matter. Don't miss our upcoming content. We look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments section below.